That's what I was concerned. No, I would not remember. I would not. I know. There's something very. 20 years ago. This moment.
It seems like every time people
Over and say hi to the HR crew. Wendy, go! My friend.
Now you gotta step in.
We're joined now, Gene. Excellent. This is the best purchase.
Lady
coming back and wearing one.
Oh my God, don't even bring that up. And we understood that you were really excited about never being the interim director again.
Well, that was the third time would not have been a charge.
So, as the senior inspector, the oldest one in the office, and Bill, we decided to grant you a certificate of exemption.
Oh!
This acknowledges that Gene Bergman is now and forevermore exempt from serving as the interim director of Burlington Code Enforcement.
Excellent. There you go. Excellent. That is good. 2 times was enough. Last call.
Okay. I know most of you, not all of you. My name's Peter Clavel, and I worked a few years in this building, attended 500 meetings in this room, but I'm happy to be here this evening. Now, if you haven't guessed by the smile on this man's face, Gene Bergman experienced the last day of his work in City Hall today. Create the opportunity for that to happen. Now, it was 20 years ago to this day that I hired Gene as assistant city attorney. Gene, will you ever forgive me? No? And, 20 years working in the basement of City Hall. And we're going to hear some of the stories. But this wasn't Gene's only service to this community. For his entire life in Burlington, he has been a community builder, and he has contributed much to public service and community service. Now, here's a couple of the jobs that he had. First, he started off, as folks know, as a city councilor from Ward 2 for 3 terms, 6 years. Was it city council then or Board of Aldermen?
First Board of Aldermen. Thank you, Barbie Wilkie, for
Yeah. So other titles that he has held, he has been Senior Assistant City Attorney, Assistant City Attorney, Grand Juror, First Constable, Health Officer, Code Enforcement Director on not one but 2 separate occasions, Presiding Officer for Elections, and on a couple of times he's even served as the temporary acting mayor. And if the mayor hadn't returned to town, he would have municipalized the banks.
Thank God we've changed.
Gene is really an old red. If you don't know that by now, you probably do know that by now for sure, but Gene is an old red, and probably back in the 70s as he was running for People for Acting for Change Together, which was attempting to try to make the co-op a people's co-op. That evolved. Yeah, that's changed. But Gene was there with a bunch of tables, getting food to people in the old North End in a way that was, at that point, thought of as being more, less, you have to eat our food, you could eat your food if you want to, a little bit more open to the low-income people who were living in the old North End. And Gene was a staff person for that. And also as part of that, Gene, at some point, me and Fioramonti was saying Gene was going to go over to the peace movement and try to make them more red. And so, we were really excited about the fact that that was going to be now a new thing. It was going to infuse the peace movement with some a little more, socialism that felt was a little bit too pacifist, right? But then he met Wendy, so that was done. We lost Gene to that, but you know, I think the blend has been there for a while now, and it's been good. Yes, it has evolved. So then the other time I think that Gene probably first came into City Hall is he was probably leading a march into City Hall to the City Council chambers, which were on the top floor, which is now CETO, because this was closed off. And Gene, I think, led sloganeering, which was rent control is our goal. And we all marched. Mark Coulter was there. And Bruce was there. We all marched into it. The city council looked at us. We demanded that they impose rent control. They adjourned. They went into the side room, waited for us to leave, and then came back out and continued their work. But Gene has been, in all seriousness, Gene has lived what we in housing have called the 3 Ps: the production of affordable housing, the preservation of affordable housing and of the housing stock that we have, and the protection of the vulnerable. The 3 Ps are something that those of us who do housing continue to remind ourselves of what's important. Gene's a housing hero for all of us in this room.
I begin my service as city attorney coming over from being Pat Leahy's deputy. I was a deputy state's attorney. I wore suits and whatever, and all of a sudden, fast forward a couple of years, and there's this wild-eyed kid on the city council. The only thing we had in common is we were both tall, and we both had full heads of hair. He had been, I was doing the collective bargaining for the city. He was trying to organize the Free Press. We had that in common.
I wish you were on the other side.
But, you know, through our political differences, it became pretty apparent after a little bit that the more I saw this kid, the more I liked him. And we had conversations when he was on the city council. I think I was among those that encouraged him to go to law school. He clerked in our office during law school, and then I got the pleasure to work with him as city attorney. And within the 3-minute rule, I just want to say that my fondest recollection of working with Gene was not any one particular case, but was the Friday afternoons or the end of the day where we had had a hard day or a hard week, and Ken Schatz, Gene Bergman, or just Gene and I would just sit down and talk. And we would talk like partners in a law firm, saying, how do we do this? How can we do it better? What are we trying to accomplish? And I got more out of those little fireside chats, if I can quote a president who we really liked, than just about anything else. So I will close by saying it's propitious that Gene is going out in the same week that Justice Kennedy announces his retirement. And I am only hopeful that the city attorney's office is not reshaped in the manner that I'm afraid we're going to soon see elsewhere. But Gene, thanks very much.
And I want to talk about running for office my first time. I'm pretty sure it was Gene's seat. It was. And Gene coached me, especially on the art of door-to-door, door knocking. Now, there are different schools of thought about door knocking. And Councilor Bergman likes to settle in for a visit. And you're not leaving the house until you find out what it is you can do for them. And then you go and you do that. And so you show them that you are ready to be a city councilor before you're even elected.
We still have a stop sign at Oak Street that let us get through Boysenberg.
That's right. That's right. So Gene, so then I would talk to people about my door knocking with Gene. They say, no, no, no. You are never going to hit every house if you go with the Bergman approach. So I was, fast forward to today, and I just got back on ordinance committee, and Gene has been staffing that. And it was my opportunity to see him really in work as a city attorney. And I'm gonna miss you. I'm gonna miss that, Gene. But I'm happy for you, and I want to congratulate you for your outstanding service to the people of Burlington over many years, and I know that's going to continue in some shape. And I also want to acknowledge Wendy, who's been an important part of your team. So thank you, Wendy and Gene.
When we landed together in the city attorney's office, it really was an incredible treat to have someone as smart, as passionate, as committed as Gene to come into our office to help us work with the mayor, with Joe, to do the people's work. And I really do get a kick out of seeing the depictions of Gene's office, because it was always a treat to walk into Gene's office and see what was being displayed. And I will say, you know, Gene was a bulldog. I mean, whatever he was asked to do, he did 110%. And you just knew he was going to research everything to the nth degree. He was going to make sure that there was no stone unturned, to make sure he could figure out what was the right course of action. And we would have some pretty intense conversations. And that's not always easy with Gene, to be sure. But I loved it. I mean, I really loved it, because he, you know, just was so passionate. And and I think Peter mentioned that he was the grand juror, was part of his role. What that meant was he would go to prosecute city violations in court. And I won't deny that there were times in which I'd cringe. It's like, okay, Gene, I know it would take a deep breath, but he did it, and he did it well, and as always. And from my perspective, I really appreciated when Gene went to court, I knew and was totally confident that the city was going to be well represented. And that was really gratifying from my perspective. I really appreciate that. And Gene, you know, is incredibly competitive. That's kind of part of who he is, although I do like this, and I always knew that was part of Gene's personality and approach to life. But for me, the example of his personality and nature was another aspect of our relationship, which we were both runners. And Gene and I were on the mayor's marathon team for several years running. And
I was the anchor man.
Well, Peter, I loved it when Peter would welcome everybody to the event, and he would announce that, by the way, I'm on a marathon team. I'm running the first leg, and by the way, nobody can pass the mayor. And honestly, there were a few people who said, "Huh? Is he serious?" But one year, I guess I was silly, and I guess we were short a runner, so I had to run 2 legs, and so I handed off to Gene, and thinking that we would run together. This would be fun. You know, we could kind of talk and enjoy the event together. Gene took the baton, or the wrist brace from me, and he took off like a light. I mean, he was gone. There was just no way this was going to be a friendly event. But he pulled it off, and he was really proud. He had...
I crashed after 1 mile.
Well, that's... But he was making it known. He was the fastest guy, and I do appreciate that. I mean, the reality is, it really is a pleasure to know Gene. Thank you, Wendy, let me say. I appreciate you too, but I think that for me, as others have said, Gene has, you know, provided tremendous public service to the city of Burlington, and I know we can all be proud that we know him, that he has worked with us, and I also agree that he will continue to do great things. So thanks, Gene.
When Wendy asked me to come and say a few things about Gene, I was really excited because I started at code enforcement about 9 years ago, and prior to that, I had done a bunch of work with Gene in the peace movement, or whatever it was called. And I was really excited. I liked his energy, and I was really excited about what I was gonna see when I got there. And it was just not what I expected. I don't know if anybody's ever tried to work with Gene in both worlds. He does a very good job at compartmentalizing. But I did want to share with everybody here the 3 main lessons that I have learned from Gene when he was director of code enforcement. The first lesson is the importance of starting the day as a team. Starting the day as a team. Nobody likes starting something new, and one day Gene walks into the office and he announces, we're gonna start staff meeting every morning. And I was like, what? But every morning, do we really need that much staff meeting? And then I was like, where are we gonna do that? Because every office was small, and it turns out it was gonna be in my office. So the following Monday, he calls everyone into my little office, and 12 of us are sitting around the room, and he pulls this out from under his chair. It was underneath one of his many extra button downs that he keeps in his office. And he does this. The room was silent, not because I was so uncomfortable. I was like, okay, I guess this means that he wants our attention. He worked really hard for a couple of weeks to convince us that a morning meeting was really important and that it was going to provide a lot of value to our work. I don't know, but I did see his effort, and his effort to create a cohesive team stuck. 9 years later, code enforcement continues to meet every morning for about 20 to 59 minutes. And every morning, we're all a little bit uncomfortable and very grudgingly coming to the meeting. So thank you, Gene, for that.
But do you start with this?
We don't, no. That was the most uncomfortable part. So the second thing that Gene taught me while I was at code enforcement is to ask, what does the code say? I know you think I'm about to break into a song, but I'm not. But you can imagine. But let me finish first. So some of you who don't know him that well may not know that he will argue about anything. Right, anything. He'll just argue about it. And it's not because he's contrary, it's just because he's right. Right? So, what? Right? Okay. Right, okay. So, anytime one of us would walk into his office with a problem that we found in the field, it doesn't matter what Gene was doing, but 90% of the time he was eating or he just came back from exercising, so he was drenched in sweat or had mayonnaise. I would say, Gene, I don't know what to do here. And he knew with the look on our faces what was about to happen. As soon as we walked into the office, he would already be leaning backwards and pulling out the code. He would pull out the one that's bound, that costs $150 to make, not the printed kind that I would make for myself, but the bound kind, the same one that the judges go through. So what does the code say? He would immediately reach to it, and it didn't matter what he was doing, and he was so supportive and so thoughtful. He would also tell us, in the same vein, to keep everything that was written. So you can see, though, that even in the 9 years since I've worked at code enforcement, my desk went from having one sheet of paper to 50,000 sheets of paper, and I have files I haven't touched in 6.5 years. But Gene told me I had to keep it for 7. So 6 more months on that. All right. This is a lesson. I hope everyone's taking notes. You're welcome. So now today, when we have our morning meetings and somebody isn't sure about something the first thing that a few of us say is, well, what does the code say? Yes. So the last thing is Gene seems to be very fond of saying it's simple. It's simple. And then he would get launched into this 45-minute explanation about why it was simple. Now, I don't know that you really understand what the word simple means, but I'm very grateful for all of your knowledge and all of your passion and all of your love and kindness that went into everything and all of your thoughtfulness. You want and you expect people to be able to live in decent places. And you've given our office a lot of the tools that it needed to get to where we are today. And I'm very, very grateful for it. And the last part of that is that you've taught us to prepare, to use the code, and our notes. So thank you, Gene, for passing on the values of teamwork, going to the source material, and keeping it simple by being prepared. Thank you.
I've got a few more people on my list, and we're going to open it as time allows. Some of you asked for the opportunity to speak, and some who didn't ask.
Well, unfortunately, I don't have a funny or awkward story. But my remembrance of Gene is he started People Acting for Change Together. He's reminded me that he didn't.
Not true.
But and the perspective that I have is really from the early co-op days, where we were really trying to provide food for people, not for profit. And Gene was instrumental with a group of low-income women who wanted to do canned goods. And we used the co-op from Hanover and brought in canned goods, which was not on the list that was being provided by the co-op. So that basis of knowing that you wanted to serve the people and not for profit, that's what I remember, and I still think he started it. Thanks.
So Gene has always been, there's a phrase on the left, speaking truth to power. Well, Gene typifies, exemplifies, and lives that out on a regular basis. I just want to tell you a couple of places where I saw him do this. Quite a long time ago, I was finishing up, I just finished at UVM. I was hired to do some kind of organizing for this group called the Progressive Coalition. It was me and Terry would meet weekly, and he would tell me what to do, and I would go do it, basically. But sort of quietly, I organized a debate on campus between these two candidates, 1986, Gene's first run, Rick Sharp and Gene Bergman. Now, if any of you know Burlington, that is a great little thing going on right there. So they're up there doing their thing. I'm just sitting back in the audience. I'm not asking questions. I'm not making any trouble. All of a sudden, a hand goes up from a certain Ward 1 Democrat, very well-known Ward 1 Democrat, Mr. Mahoney, and says, I just want to point out the conflict of interest here. This debate is being organized by a guy who's helping Gene Bergman in the campaign. And Tuna Snyder was the moderator, and he said, Mr. Mahoney, sit down. Gene said, Morris, I'd be happy to debate you too if you want to come up here. But I'm doing fine with Rick Sharp, so let's just keep going. So that was the first time. Next time was fast forward a couple years, we're at Bread and Puppet up at this incredible location in Glover, and I see Bernie. He's mayor, it's not that big a deal. People aren't flocking to him because they're not really sure about who he is or anything. Gene is in the woods. Literally, they're yelling at each other. Their faces, although Bernie's a little bit taller, are as close as they could possibly be without biting each other's faces, and they're yelling at each other. And I think, wow, that little guy has guts. Look at him. I find out that Gene's basically telling him to sort of shift his position around the demonstrations happening at GE. That's what he was doing. He was trying to get Bernie to move on that issue, which was great. Then I see Gene on the baseball field, and that's kind of scary. Because when he gets pissed and thinks that the kids or the Old North End are getting screwed, he goes up to the umpires and he lets them have it. And he did that on a couple occasions, so much to the point where his son, I think, or maybe Colin's son, had to be brought in as the manager because Gene was booted, and I think Colin might have been booted in one of those games as well, but Gene led the way, certainly by example, speaking truth to power once again. And I would say though, when I served with Gene on the council, one of the things that he taught me was not just, he just said something amazing, is be prepared. Gene really made us work hard on Sunday nights. We would get together, and if you had a partner, they would be pretty bummed that we were getting together every Sunday. But Gene believed we needed to get together, figure out what we were trying to accomplish, be aligned, work out our differences. Peter was the mayor. We had to fight with Peter sometimes on issues, but we'd come to these meetings pretty unified. And it was an amazing experience to be there with Gene, and we got some amazing stuff done. And people hear about things like inclusionary zoning and protecting people from condominium conversions and tenant protections, and a lot of that is because Gene and Earhart and others, but Gene really stuck with it for 6 years. You were on the council for 6 years, which is kind of an amazing accomplishment. So we all owe you, Gene. Thanks a lot.
Anybody here remember Comrade Tom O. Smith? Dear friends, Campaneros and Campaneras, I'm sorry I can't be with you today to celebrate Gene's exit from City Hall. From the earliest days of PAC, people recognized that Gene was a trench worker, a long hauler. Looking back to those days, if any of us had told him 40 years later that he would be a lawyer, a city worker, working for a Democrat, he would have headed for Hardwick and beyond. However, while duking it out on the front lines, persevering through losses and victories, Gene also won widespread respect for his leadership, a leadership that was grounded in the realities of the King Street neighborhood in the Old North End. No matter where the paycheck was coming from, he knew who he was working for, and it wasn't the Free Press or the Democratic Party. He always had a vision of justice and equality, and those abstractions were concretely represented by friends and neighbors. Two of his gifts stand out for me. First, I could never understand how he could juggle so many balls. The Peace and Justice Center, his and Wendy's garden, the Unitarian Church, a political office, a community organizer, a Little League baseball coach, his family, etc. And none of these were superficial pursuits. He was engaged and always engaged. While this won my respect, it also evoked a sense of guilt. I was never doing enough. I just couldn't keep up. But there was another side of Gene, and with the weight of the world on his shoulders, he always had a laugh at the ready. The work we are doing, and we're doing, was serious, and Gene's alter ego crazy guy was such a relief. Often this humor was self-effacing and allowed me to let go and let both of us laugh at our foolishness. Plugging into everyday Gene meant getting filled with fresh energy, charged with humor and perspective. He's my buddy, and I'm happy that he has one less thing to do. And now, only Wendy to answer to. My best to all of you present, and thank you for bringing so much love to the work that we do. Tom Smith. Thank you, Tom.
I walk into Gene's office, and sometimes not even before I walked into Gene's office, all of a sudden I hear, I can't even do it right.
Because you're not calm enough.
Because I'm not calm enough. Because I have a list of things I want to talk about with Gene. He says my energy's too high. I need to calm it down for him. So I'm going to work on this. I should just get myself my own, right? So message to Richard and Justin. If you don't have one of these, maybe you ought to get one. So Gene and I, energy level wise, yeah, okay. Take a breath. So I just want to say thank you for teaching me to slow down and to relax. We'll figure this out together. The list is long, but we'll get to everything. And I want to thank you for getting to everything. Even today, you tried to get to the last thing. We almost got there. Thank you for the reference. But I also want to speak on behalf of the Burlington Police Department. And I would like our acting chief, Janine Wright, to come up because we have a little something. Oh, she's right here. Okay. So someone, a wise person once told me, when you talk, don't talk so loud. Is that what you're telling me? When you have something to say in a moment like this, you have to be brief, be brilliant, and be gone. So I'm going to work on the be gone part, and I'm going to defer to Acting Chief Janine Wright, who has a little something.
Jean, did you really teach her to be calm?
We tried.
I say she is a lot better.
Really? Because I think you need another 20 years, buddy. Yeah.
Get you a singing bowl. Make her before she does anything.
Okay, I'll do that. That is terrific advice. My name
Careful,
is,
she has handcuffs for you.
my name is Jan Wright. I'm here on behalf of the Burlington Police Department. As you know, Chief Del Pozo couldn't be here. I'm sure that he would fill this room with wisdom and kindness. But I did want to say that Jean has been one of our great partners for many, many, many years, even long before I came on PD. I can also tell you that any time that I've talked to him, sometimes I've come away more confused than I was when I went in. And maybe that's across the board, but I do appreciate everything that he's done for us. One thing that I wrote in the book was I did also appreciate the kind words that he would have for me when I'd call him at 4:30 in the afternoon on a Friday for something that was kind of emergent. I can't repeat those words here, but I thank you very much for sticking in there with us and being a great friend. Thank you.
I learned never sit between Jean and Wendy. I learned never to argue with the boys. And I learned if you don't love Wendy Co., you may as well go home.
So Jean was the attorney for Burlington City Arts for many years of our life. And many times when we walked into the office, I'd hear this, "Oh no." This anxiety that started before I actually got into the office, and he'd be, "What did you do now?" As though it always was going to be something that he was going to have to recover or cover up for or figure out how to get me out of jail. I mean, and that never happened. No, Gene was amazing in terms of his support of our office to some very complex issues around artists' rights, renting space in Burlington that was a little bit below the radar in terms of using it for artistic endeavors, and supporting us in figuring out how to bring affordability to the arts community and to protect all of us in the things that we did that were sometimes just a little bit not quite kosher. So Jean, we thank you very much for all your years of service and for protecting all of us and the thousands of artists in this community. So thank you so much.
Just as a way of leading in, I've known Jean since I came to town in 1992. We predate anything professionally. Our kids went to the schoolhouse together. We formed a friendship. I encountered him in different ways. We lived very different lives. I was a public defender. He used to come over to court with a miscellaneous parking ticket or some sort of disorderly conduct ticket. It would be against one of my clients. My client would have perhaps 16, 17 charges, all sorts of different problems. He would sit through calendar call. I would see him waiting to deal with a $25 ticket. I would deliberately make him wait until the end of calendar call, and then I would ask for another hearing. And I would tell Gene that he should go pick up his new slip for the next hearing. It would be in another 5 or 6 weeks. He would come back. He would track it like that, doggedly, forever. That type of interplay between Gene and I has existed forever. I've watched him come. He passionately cares, he passionately believes, but he talks with everybody, he gets along with everybody, he will argue with anybody, but somehow everybody in the end comes to know respect, and he will continue to persevere. He doesn't compromise, but he was always done what he thought was right on behalf of the city, and he's done that regardless of who his bosses are, what the prevailing winds are. I give him huge credit for that. He is, in many respects, an older brother to me, and I'm proud to be up here and read a proclamation that was signed by Mayor Moreau Weinberger today. It says, whereas Gene has given 20 years of service to the city of Burlington, with many good times and some challenging ones, and whereas Gene has worked seamlessly with different administrations and during a number of staff transitions, beginning when Peter Clavel was mayor and now ending his reign with me. And whereas Gene has held many positions in the city of Burlington, including senior assistant city attorney, grand juror, first constable, health officer, code enforcement director twice, presiding officer for elections, and temporary mayor several times. And whereas Gene has been a strong advocate for the city over the past 20 years and has been a tremendous asset to the city attorney's office during that time, always demonstrating that intangible love of the work that distinguishes excellent lawyers from the rest. And whereas Gene has served the city with dedication and a smile, even when missing a powder day at Mad River Glen, and whereas Gene has provided hours of musical entertainment to his co-workers, whether in song or by singing bowl, and whereas Gene's love for Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan, Steve Earle, and other rock, blues, and folk musicians, as evidenced by the music emanating from his office late on Friday afternoons, will be sorely missed, most particularly his solo rendition of Subterranean Homesick Blues. And whereas Gene's willingness to help another coworker is as steadfast as his noon trips to the Y, and whereas we will be still looking for Gene on his long runs and in the city marathon, and now therefore I, Mayor Moreau Weinberger, Mayor of the City of Burlington, do hereby proclaim Friday, June 29th, 2018 to be Eugene M. Bergman Day.
There you go, Mayor. That's for you. These are from the office.
Go have at it.
Go have at it.
Wow. So, thank you for coming. Do I have it? We got it now? Okay, thank you, Micah.
How many pages in those notes, Gene?
Have you not heard and paid attention, Earhart, to what these people have been saying? I mean, there are folks here off the script, so I'm sorry, it's gonna be longer. I mean, Jeannie, Francis, and I worked at the Buyer's Digest in 1978 together, and Mark Coulter and I were there at PACT. I met him when he was hanging out on the couch, but after this incredible work that they did to clean up a house on North Avenue, wasn't one North Avenue, maybe it was close to that, I forget what, the Bissett's house, from this terrible minimum housing condition. And I actually went to join PACT in 1973 and 74, and it was the start in terms of Burlington city politics of this amazing run that has got, as I look out at the DPW folks here, the opportunity to work on the real strengthening of the fiber, the bones, the infrastructure of this city. Richard and all the other people, right? I mean, I'm quirky. You just look at the board and you'll see that. So let me just start off. I will not sing this chorus of Steve Earle, but I was like making sure that everybody heard Dylan today, because they weren't going to be hearing it anymore, because it seems like the apples decay instead of falling not far from the tree. And Steve Earle who I love, has got this song called Someday. And the chorus goes, someday I'm finally gonna let go, 'cause I know there's a better way, and I wanna know what's over that rainbow. I'm gonna get out of here someday, someday. So, that's just how I started this. Elijah does not really appreciate, no, I'm sorry, it's gonna take a while, boy. Get used to it. You should be used to it. First, I have to, and this is being published somewhere, nowhere, I mean, or being recorded probably for my posterity, but I do have to thank the taxpayers, without whom, you know, I wouldn't have been able to do this life's work, because, I mean, and you've heard me, I sort of preach, but government is essential. And all around us, we can see what happens when states fail or are incompetent or are not up to the task. And I haven't been perfect, Lord knows you've heard that. But I truly believe that this city is a little bit better because of the work that I did with all of you, you incredible people, over the last 20 years. I want to thank Peter for appointing me in June of 1998, and I hope I've proven your judgment to be sound. People complain about government and how inefficient it is, but you know, I just don't believe that this has been true in my time in and around Burlington city government, at least since 1981, which some of you know what happened in 1981. Sorry, Joe, for the antebellum. But in fact, Peter gave me a 5-week deadline when I was very first hired to pull all of the departments doing code enforcement. And you remember this, Ned, because you were there before I had to do this. And along with HR, hire a chief code enforcement officer to begin to break down the silos between the departments that were doing code enforcement. And we met that deadline. And it led to the creation of the Code Enforcement Office Bill and the dedicated enforcement for the first time, and you know this, Jeannie, of zoning and vacant buildings and health ordinances. And Brian was there at the beginning of that development of the vacant building ordinance, which I was lucky enough to draft, as well as make improvements to the minimum housing code. And in fact, it led to the coordination as well and collaboration with police and fire. And Jan was talking about this, that we had never really had. And let's say this is a big step, and I know we have a long ways to go, but it's complicated. This stuff is really complicated and it's expensive. So it takes a while, but I can tell you that we are just so much better off today because of the work that we all did all the way back there 20 years ago. So Peter, thank you. Thank you for the chance to make a real difference right from the beginning. I really believe that. Thank you. I don't know if you all know that being an assistant or city attorney, and a city attorney is an annual appointment. I mean, think about that. You only have a 1-year job. And so I have to thank Bob Kiss and Murrow Weinberger for reappointing me and showing their confidence in me. Because an annual appointment for anybody who's had to deal with it or has dealt with maybe a biannual appointment is Chapin is shaking his head. And as my colleagues in the office know, and especially during regime changes, is very nerve-wracking. And I think I proved my mettle. Bob, we responded, and this is something that really stands out to me, to a stormwater challenge. Good job, Megan, for keeping that going. And the presentation that was given to the City Council this past Monday shows just how important the work that we did, that you signed into office, is, and that you don't get nearly the credit for. So I want to thank you for the leadership that you took in that, and for giving me the ability to make that happen, or to help make that happen. Because there's nothing that I have done in any of the time that I have been involved in anything that has been all by myself. So I really want to thank you, and I want to thank you, of course, for the chance of giving me a second go round as the interim code enforcement director. You know, if you got a functional office, you don't need a frickin' staff meeting every morning. It might be helpful, but you don't really need that. So let us be clear. The first time that ship was listing, particularly, I don't know what, I'm not a sailor, but it was hanging right into the water in 2004 when I did it the first time. The second time, it was really wobbling, not the least of which was because we had health, we had vacant buildings, we had zoning, we had, I'm trying to think of what else we had. Well, that's enough. That was enough. We had and minimum housing, of course. So we had all this stuff going on, and we had some real leadership issues. And so we had not only the challenge of zoning backlogs that really were not getting systemically taken care of well, but also the vacant building ordinance wasn't really being enforced. And on top of that, then we had the joy of dealing with the H1N1 pandemic, flu pandemic, and I'd be happy to turn over to somebody in this city the documents about pandemic flu planning that I still have in my office. Sorry, Anthea. You know, from having to deal with that. And of course, who can forget the pigs that were roaming around the New North End with flocks of seagulls circling in search of the ubiquitous feed left out by the farmer from the kingdom, who just didn't realize that the Intervale is just a stone's throw away from suburbia. So we had code enforcement. Poor Ned had to go out there in terms of building stuff. We had some zoning stuff, but that office took all these new responsibilities on while continuing to do the housing inspections, which are the main responsibility of the office. And so, Bob, again, thank you for letting me do that. And Bill, thank you very much for being there to let me get back to lawyering, which I really do love, and for giving me an exemption so I do not have to be the code enforcement officer again. It says so right up here. And for Moreau, I've spent a lot of time over the last years on infrastructure with DPW, and I can say that every time I get delayed and get detoured getting around this stinking city, that I have my own self to blame. So thank you, Moreau, for continuing my appointment so I could be part of this. But if he were here, I'd tell him that he has incredible people working for the Department of Public Works who put out project after project, all of which have to go through my pain in the ass sieve. And Richard and Justin, you're gonna love this summer. All 45 of those projects that have to be done in the next 3 weeks. And we're all better off for it. And, you know, so you have mayors who appoint you, then you have bosses who are there 3 city attorneys. So Joe, you heard from, and thank you. Thank you for having confidence in me to bring me on, to let me thrive in energizing our enforcement system, including, and he didn't mention this, letting me defend our noise ordinance in the district court, the federal district court, and then down in New York in the Second Circuit, where I'm in reporters. You know, my name is representing the city of Burlington. That is really cool. And we won a constitutional challenge, a federal case made out of a noise ticket that was issued that I had to defend. And winning that was special. Working for you, Joe, was really special. You're my friend. And Ken, I don't know. I really miss working with you. And when you asked me to be the senior assistant city attorney, you said, and you have the judgment to do this, and I turned around. I said, who is he talking to? I mean, and after all, you know, you have heard the things that you've heard, so, you know, that's not that far off, but wow. I hope I did you proud. Thank you. And if Eileen were here, I'd tell her thank you. She stepped into trying times, and it has been a pleasure to provide her with my institutional wisdom and knowledge, and I think she's valued my opinions on my work, and as a result, I think I've really provided a stability and judgment and competence that has made her job a little bit easier. And so finally, I get to thank all of you and all of the people who are not here, of which I won't go down and name, except to by name thank Linda Blanchard and Lisa Jones. You know how much I love you. You know how important you are. I'll talk about the bigger picture. And then all the other city attorneys, I saw Jessica, who came in and out a couple of times, and I've still got her files, some files that are still there. Janet Murnane, who I consulted with, and who I still have files with your name on. And then the people who have come in and out of the office, and Richard, that's been really special. Especially trying to get you to run faster in those marathon relay teams, which just never works. And to you guys and to everybody, I say that, you know, you've put up with my quirkiness and my left-wing politics and my passion. And I wrote that passion thing well before I heard anybody talk about that. You guys are my friends and not just my coworkers. And I'm now talking to everybody here in all these different departments. Your managers and your supervisors, but your engineers and your inspectors, your administrators and your maintenance people, and your firefighters and your police officers. And if there's a category that I missed, you know what I'm saying. It's the breadth of people. It's also elected and appointed officials. I saw Joan, there's Joan and Max. You know, that's really important. And Jane and Sharon. Where's Sharon? There's Sharon. You know, I mean, I've had the opportunity to serve you guys, and I hope that I've done that well. There are two basic theories, as I see it, of history. What George Bush the First called the great man theory of history, and what Howard Zinn calls the people's history theory, and I happen to belong to the Zinn school. I believe that everybody is essential, all of us, that each and every one of us make history, And so we all deserve to be recognized and respected. And leaders, I believe, are best when they bring out the best in the people that they've been charged to lead, to help them connect with something larger than themselves and give them the chance to sit at the table and make a difference. And I have tried to live into this compassionate leadership style. Ali, I did not mention you as the elected official. My eyes are going all over the place. I did sometimes do that better than other times, but I hope that you all saw that I've really tried to live these values every single day, and every success that we have made was the result of all of us. All of us. You all have an awful lot to be proud of, and I want to thank you for letting me part of your success over these last few years. Whew. So, thank you all, and as some in my tradition would say, hasta la victoria siempre venceremos. Adiós.